Before we go to the actual meat of this recording, I would first want to recap on essential points. One, when we talk about drugs, our drugs or ligands must again bind to our receptor or drug target by a certain complementarity. Again, that means that our drug molecules should fit into a gap called the active site of our drug target. Okay? And also, what we learned about agonists and antagonists is that after I have my drug binding to my receptor, this drug will either increase or decrease or prevent the increase of the activity that this receptor originally has, which we often call as the constitutive activity. Now, I showed you a lot of graphs a while ago in the previous recording, which would include how the graph increases with an agonist or how the graph remains flat with an antagonist. And there's much more to that. Because, of course, when we talk about antagonists or inhibitors, we are basically also changing the parameters that we are measuring, which include the Bmax, or in terms of effect, the Emax, as well as the KD, or for enzymes, the KM. Now, I would just like to emphasize that in my next few minutes of discussion, I will use KD and KM interchangeably because targets could either be receptors or enzymes, right? And I don't want to set a distinction for now because the concept for both cases are exactly the same or almost exactly the same. With that said, let's get straight to it. What we should know is that as I have been showing you again and again and again, most drugs bind to a certain target. It could be a receptor or an enzyme. And if I have drugs that do that, most of our drugs do that in the first place, we have what we call a direct acting drug. So it could apply to both agonists or antagonists, okay? So we have some drugs, we call them direct agonists. We also have drugs, we call them direct antagonists, depending on how they change the constitutive activity. And I'm really putting emphasis on this word because if I have a direct drug or direct acting drug, the target that they bind to must have the actual function. For example, let's have a recept that maybe I should use a very specific example just to give you an idea. Let's say that this thing right here is a receptor called the histamine 1 receptor, which in the future you will learn that this is responsible for our allergic reactions. Okay, and as long as I have my endogenous histamine, all of us have histamine with us, right? Once our body histamine binds to this active site of H1 receptors, it will give us those things we expect from allergy: itchiness, redness of our skin, sometimes our nose gets clogged, and so on. Those are the effects. And we don't want that. So in this case, it's more proper to employ an antagonist because we want to prevent that from happening, right? Now, in that case, our antagonists could work by two ways. And this is eerily similar to enzyme kinetics. So maybe it would be a good idea for you to review enzyme kinetics and inhibition if you want to understand this better. But moving forward, we could have drugs which could be competitive antagonists. I will mark that as red. And then non-competitive ones, which I will mark as orange. Remember, the difference is that for competitive inhibitors, they bind only to the active site. That's why we even call them competitive in the first place, right? They compete with the original molecule, in this case histamine, for the same spot. However, non-competitive antagonists are not forced to that because although they can, so this one could also go to the active site, some of our non-competitive molecules could go to another area called as allosteric sites. Now, also since our non-competitive drugs could target either this area or this area, we also often call them as mixed antagonists, right, or mixed inhibitors. Now, the deal with this is that the changes in the plot that we will see are different for competitive and non-competitive drugs. Let's take this Michaelis-Menten plot, for example, which since I just called it a Michaelis-Menten plot, let's just put substrate concentration at the x-axis and enzyme activity at the y-axis, although of course you could extrapolate that to receptors. And I know that as long as my substrate levels go up, then we will expect an increase in the efficacy, right? Until we reach the saturation point, which we know already, should know already at this point, if you plot it here, this is the Emax. So this is the Emax of the original plot, okay, the one I'm overlaying with yellow color. And then, of course, we know that if we want to get the Km, we get one half of that, trace that here, and then go here. So let's say that this is the Km initial, or the Km of the uh, uh, actual receptor, constitutive, no drug yet, no drug yet. Now, if I add a competitive inhibitor, so it's colored red, I will now be getting this plot right here. So what would have changed by then? You will notice that our highest point is still here, so even if I trace that here, I would actually be getting the same Emax. Okay, so that means that, remember, for competitive antagonists, the Emax remains unchanged, right? It didn't move. But that would also mean that I get the same half Emax. But if I plot it to the red one and then I go down, I would notice that the Km for the competitive one moved from here to here. So that means our Km actually went up. For receptors, it would be the Kd, which would be going up just the same. Okay, and if you go back to your lecture on enzyme kinetics, this should be the same thing you will be getting for competitive. Now, for non-competitive, it would be much different because in this orange plot right here, very obviously, first, the Emax has really gone down. Okay, of course, how low it goes from here would depend on how powerful the inhibitor is. But one thing is for sure, the Emax is not the same anymore. That means that one half of that is also not the same anymore. But if I plot this and then I go down, I would actually notice that the Km for the non-competitive inhibitor is pretty much similar to the original Km. So that means that the Km is unchanged from the constitutive activity, and then the Emax is actually lowered down. And this is supposed to be the expected effect for non-competitive cases. Okay. Of course, I did mention in a previous video that we will be using semi-log graphs, but all that would be doing is just converting this shape to more S-shaped ones or sigmoidal ones. But that would just give us pretty much similar information. So, I mean, if I use the white one, the original one, so this is the Emax, let's say this is one half of the Emax, and then I plot it down. So this is the Km of the original. If I use the competitive drug, what I will be getting is, again, the same Emax, right? Same Emax, and then I get the same one half, and then I plot it down. This is the Km with the competitive, okay? It's still moved to the right. The analysis is basically the same, right? And then if I use a non-competitive drug, um, obviously the Emax still lowered down to this level, and then if this is half of the orange Emax, and then I plot it down, then the Km for the non-competitive is pretty much the same as the one without any drug. So again, whether you see sigmoidal or hyperbolic shapes, the way you analyze these would be very much the same. Though I want you to notice that it's quite cleaner if you look at the sigmoidal graphs versus the Michaelis-Menten ones. So I think that's one of the main reasons why we use these ones and see these ones in books more often. Okay. Now, that is my discussion first by site. So meaning that drug binding is not just all about, hey, is it competitive? Is it non-competitive? No, no, no. There are also other things that we have to consider. First, when we were discussing this, our basic assumption, and this goes all the way back to biochem, okay? Our assumption whenever a substrate binds to an enzyme or whenever a drug binds to a receptor is that the bonds are non-covalent, meaning it's temporary. Meaning, if I have my drug bound with, if I'm my drug bound with the receptor, eventually after some time they will separate. So, of course, most of the time we expect that the bond we see, okay, we don't even talk about it because it's like that every single time, is a non-covalent bond. So that could involve van der Waals, hydrophobic forces, hydrogen bonds, okay, or dipole-dipoles. But there are very rare, let me write that here, very rare cases that there could be covalent bonds. And of course, if the bond between the drug and the receptor is covalent, this is now permanent. So, of course, once it's basically like superglue. So once your drug has been covalently bound like superglue to the receptor, there's no chance at all anymore for them to separate. That's why every time I have a drug and then we study it and then I mention, hey, this drug does covalent bonding, you automatically assume that it has an irreversible form of bonding. Now, um, for the case of non-competitive drugs, though sometimes non-competitive drugs bind by non-covalent interactions, the mere fact that let's go back to the orange. When we go back to the orange, you notice, right, that the Emax is never the same. This was the original Emax. It went down. And of course, if I continue with this orange graph, that means that the Emax would never go back to the original. In that context, I could also say that non-competitive antagonism, as long as my drug is bound to the receptor, is irreversible. Now, at this point, everything is a mess. I'm not even convinced with myself how I discussed it so far. That's why I think a table would be necessary for me to emphasize when is the only time that the effect of a drug would be reversible. Because, hey, all of us, or very rarely do we want a drug to have an irreversible effect. We want to imagine ourselves that, hey, I drink my drug, I drink my medicine, its effects should wear off later in the day. If I'm taking a sleeping pill, I don't want to be asleep my entire life after, right? Or if I take some kind of drug to help me stay awake, I also don't want to stay awake all my life. So we want reversible effects. It's kind of safer. And the only time you will be getting reversible effects is if I have an antagonist that is competitive, at the same time, it only bonds via non-covalent interactions. And that means that most of the drugs, specifically inhibitors or antagonists, we will be discussing are competitive non-covalent binders. There are some rare cases we have non-competitive inhibitors, and automatically, once you hear that word, it's already going to give you an irreversible effect because the Emax will always be down. Even worse if it's covalent because there's no chance for the receptor to get rid of this anymore. Now, also, automatically, I did mention it a while ago, if I have a covalent binder, regardless of whether it binds only to the active site or competitive, or if it binds to both active and allosteric or non-competitive, I don't care. As long as I have a covalent bond, that would automatically be an irreversible form of inhibition. Okay. Now, these things I've been discussing apply only to direct binders, which I should say is pretty much 95 or even more than 95% of all the drugs I will be discussing in the future. However, there are very, very, very rare cases that we have what we call indirect acting drugs. Indirect drugs are those that bind to a certain target. And remember this, all drugs, almost all drugs, must bind to something. It's just that an indirect, why do you even call it like that? It's because an indirect antagonist only binds to a target that is related to the actual function, related, but not the one with the actual function. Okay? And that actual function is actually belonging to another protein that we don't really want to bother. For example, if I go back to the direct idea, let's say that I have the ACH or acetylcholine receptor. If I want a direct acting drug, I should have an agonist or antagonist that would bind to the same area that acetylcholine binds to, right? Because if this is the enzyme, or sorry, if this was the receptor, this is the original molecule, my drugs that are quote unquote direct should also be interacting to the same area as my acetylcholine. Direct. However, in this case, if I have an indirect acting drug, they are not actually going to go straight to our acetylcholine receptor. So how can we do that? For example, imagine you have a lot of acetylcholine molecules in your body, and of course, we know that acetylcholine molecules, if they bind with the acetylcholine receptor, we get some kind of effect. okay, that may be beneficial to us. However, you have to know that there are enzymes in our body that are responsible for breaking down acetylcholine. And of course, if this enzyme succeeds in breaking down acetylcholine, then we don't expect any acetylcholine anymore. Again, as long as this enzyme successfully breaks down acetylcholine, then goodbye, no acetylcholine. Now, if I want a drug that is an indirect agonist here, what I could do is to have a drug that would block this enzyme. So I see here I have antagonist. This one blocks this enzyme. By blocking this enzyme, my acetylcholine molecule does not anymore interact with this because again, this like clogs this thing up. And then that means that if I have an antagonist, this process will be blocked. What would happen if I block this? Would acetylcholine still be broken down? Not anymore, right? And basically, what we're doing here is to increase the levels of this thing, which would now be successfully going to its receptor and getting some kind of effect. My question is, if the enzyme here was still alive, I mean, if there was no drug here, and then this enzyme was still alive, will I get acetylcholine? No, because my acetylcholine will be broken down by something else. But the fact that I have some guy right here, some drug right here, preventing this from happening, will allow more acetylcholine to bind here, thus improving the effect. And this is what indirect means. This drug, what did it do at the end? Improve the activity of this receptor. Question, did this drug even go to this in the first place? Do I see any arrow of this going straight to this receptor? None. It did its mechanism by something else. So going back to the definition, the target related is this enzyme, and the actual function is elicited by this. An indirect drug does not go to the actual function, but only targets this related thing. Okay, thus giving justice to the word indirect. And this indirect binding is usually particular for receptors with endogenous molecules, just like acetylcholine, because acetylcholine is an example of a neurotransmitter. However, let me repeat as I end this recording, I just want to remind that most of the time, the drugs we will be discussing are more of direct drugs.